welcome. We'll just begin by acknowledging First Australians and recognizing their continuous connection to country, community, and culture. Today, we have a very interesting guest, Bree Bullock, Managing Associate of Armstrong Legal in Brisbane, Queensland, who's a criminal expert with litigation background who comes into the discussion prompted by a series of quotes that she made in a very interesting article in the Cairns Post, referring to a sworn officer, Noel Davis, who on a visit to Japan made a series of arguably racially insensitive and disparaging comments about Japanese people, Japanese culture.
Well, I'll get us home. Sorry, mate, you didn't need it.
Jesus Christ.
Alright, now get this once in the again, because this is doing my head in this country. Everything here is fantastic. The food's great, people are awesome. A lot of dudes, you're not sure they're dudes or chicks, they're very feminine people. But this smoking situation's got to stop Japan, right?
Good to see Highway Patrol in Japan work about as hard as they do in Australia. Me dead.
And he's come back to Australia, and it appears that he's faced some disciplinary actions as a result of posts that he's made on Facebook. So we have Bree here with us today, who is a legal expert who's opined on some of these things in the media. And we just wanted to welcome her to the show and just have a chat about racial insensitivity, how it relates to the public sphere, and again, the court of public opinion. And we're really interested in hearing Bree's opinion about how public sphere comments that may be made innocuously can somehow trip into a much more complicated and dynamic legal set of consequences. So with that, welcome, Bree.
Thank you, Jason. It's nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. It's really great. And we read your quotations in the Cairns Post with a great deal of interest. And we'll be linking to that article in the episode. But maybe let's just talk about the specific case. So you have an active duty sworn officer in the QPS, the Queensland Police Service. He's doing what all red-blooded Australians do. They enjoy. We're in the doorstep of so many of these travel destinations. He's taking a trip, enjoying some nice food, different culture. He then makes a few comments on Facebook, and then all of this stuff happens. So give us a little sort of insight into how you heard about this story and when you decided that you felt it was appropriate for you to make some comments.
Look, like a lot of people, I saw these videos that were posted. A lot of it came up in the media, and it kind of came up in my feed. I do keep an eye, particularly on media around the work that I do. So I work in criminal defence. Police behaviour is a particular interest of mine. As a defence lawyer, and I've been in practice for over 10 years, you do have to be a certain level of critical of police in the work that I do. And so when I do see examples of police behaviour in the media, which I know from my own experience, my knowledge of the law, but also a bit of my legal background, working in some professional disciplinary work, is unacceptable. So I know from a legal sense why it's unacceptable, but also from a social sense and a moral sense why it's wrong. It was particularly interesting to me, and the firm that I work with, Armstrong Legal, have some media connections, and we were invited to comment because of the nature of the work that we do. That's how I came to be quoted in the Courier Mail about it.
Yeah, definitely. So is this a case where if he made these comments in a more private setting, if some of the settings perhaps on the post, if they were limited to his friends, this would have never become an issue? Is it the fact that he broadcast this, that he published it in a public way, that is the issue?
That's a good question. I think it's safe to assume that anything that you put on the internet nowadays is not always completely private, unless you have a really small circle of friends on your social network who are not likely to share things that you've shared if they are offensive. Then, it's not safe to post things that this sort of thing without assuming that it may make its way out into public. I'm grateful to have grown up at a time where not everything that we did was put on the internet, and that's something that, looking to the future, I really worry for younger people about. But people who are in professions like a police service, in particular, are held to a high standard, both socially in a legal setting as well. They have rules which govern their behaviour and their conduct, not just when they're in uniform, but also when they're on holidays overseas. So I think people who work in those professions who know about those obligations need to be even more careful about the way, like the representations they are making. They are the face of the police service, whether they are in uniform or not. And so it's entirely inappropriate that they behave in that way, knowing that could then become public and create, like you say, some pretty major flow-on effects for public confidence in the police service. And then again, flow-on issues into the justice system as a whole. It all really the justice system as a whole will start to wobble if each of the key players in it cannot be relied upon to perform their role with integrity and impartiality. So it does have these wider scale impacts, more so, I think, than people sometimes realise.
Right, and that's where being a sworn officer, somehow you're not a private citizen, right? Once you take that oath, you're an officer of the court, right? In a way, the testimony of a police officer is just presumably, and all I know about this is from the TV series Law and Order, but the presumption would be that the testimony of a sworn officer is going to be graded higher than just any other civilian, right? So presumably, by making comments that somehow denigrate that oath, you're almost, in a sense, devaluing that sort of special status that you should have, or we as private citizens should extend to you.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think that parallel that you've drawn between lawyers and police officers is a really good one, as an example. Ultimately, it comes down to trust, our relationships, and also standards that we're held to. So both lawyers and police officers each swear an oath upon entry into their profession, and that oath is a public promise, not just to do our job, but to uphold values of integrity and honesty and fairness. So for lawyers, we're bound by very strict ethical frameworks. We have solicitors' conduct rules. Our paramount duty is to the court and to the administration of justice. And then we also have this fiduciary or relationship of trust with our clients. We have a duty to act in the best interest of our clients. So without that trust from clients and from the courts, we can't do our job properly. And for police officers, there's a bit of a parallel, because their equivalent trust relationship, in my mind, is with the community and with the courts. So they hold extraordinary powers to arrest people, to search their homes, their cars, their person, to detain people and to use force to do their job. And if, I guess, without wanting to sound like I'm quoting Spider-Man, with great power comes that great responsibility. And I would add to that, needs to be as a similar level or higher level of accountability to keep that power in check. Otherwise, bad things can happen. And if the community can't trust police to exercise those powers impartially and with integrity, or if the courts can't trust the integrity of the police service or a particular police witness, that system really starts to wobble. And every case depends on the assumption that the police witnesses in a matter are acting with honesty and integrity and with fairness, and that they're doing so lawfully without bias. So when you start to see examples of obvious bias and really problematic bias, it can really undermine community trust in the police service and have a flow-on impact for the justice system.
I don't want to pile on to the particular officer because I read it, I've watched the videos multiple times. I mean, I have to say, it's just, in my mind, the best justice to mete out would be to ridicule him just in total symmetry to what he's done. And I'm going to be doing that on TikTok as part of this video, which I think is fair, but I don't want to go beyond that, because the content of what he said, I think it's worth parsing a little bit of what he said, whereby there are a few things where he has a go at everyone almost. He has a go at the highway patrol in Queensland. He's saying, they're not doing anything, like, the Japanese coppers are just as lazy as the Queensland Highway Patrol. So he's having a go at them. He's having a go at making comments about, the Asian men, Japanese men are effeminate. He's making comments, obviously very insensitive comments. But I guess the question, again, with your legal background, your particular interest in, you mentioned your interest in police behavior. But if we could just zoom out a little bit, right? Can you give us a little sense as to when does speech become hateful? When does speech trip into contemptuous speech? Whereby, presumably saying, I can say things like, I don't like a particular cuisine. It's not tasty. It might be insensitive, but I can, as a private citizen, imagine that comments like that are totally within the realm of not being problematic. But when it becomes targeted, when it becomes something specific about an ethnic group or something designed to harm, what is the line? How should private citizens think about this?
That's a really good question. Again, I think you could do a whole podcast just on this particular point. I think the line between cultural insensitivity and where some legal liability starts to come in, and I'm speaking, I guess, from my experience in Queensland and the laws in Queensland, the cultural insensitivity that we see or experience day to day here is these are like the hurtful or rude or sort of ignorant comments, the ones that you either experience or hear happening and it's jarring and you know that it's not right. They might be throwaway comments or comments similar to, for example, the ones that this police officer had unfortunately published all over the internet. They're not necessarily unlawful, but they are problematic because they are a part of the problem. And the point at which legal liability starts to arise is when that conduct crosses into racial vilification. So here in Queensland, we have an Anti-Discrimination Act, and racial vilification is any public act that incites hatred or serious contempt or severe ridicule of a person or a group on the basis of their race. And we also have federal or Commonwealth legislation, which is very similar, which talks about how it's unlawful to do any act that discriminates on the basis of race in public life. So, I mean, we have these broader pieces of legislation that can come into play in different ways in an ordinary citizen's life. The most common way I would say it probably comes into it is as a part of someone's employment. I'm not an employment lawyer, but as we all know, most employers have workplace health and safety policies. They have policies about bullying and harassment, and a lot of those policies are based on workplace law. They're based on these anti-discrimination acts, or, for example, if you work in the public service, you have public service ethics acts as well. If your behaviour, if these kind of throwaway comments that you're making at work happen with a certain frequency, there's a particular theme to them, where there's a bias or prejudice that's obvious to your employers or to your colleagues, you can probably expect to be dragged into an office and spoken to about those behaviours and why they're inappropriate. At least you would hope that that's what's happening. That's probably, I guess, the most common and earliest point at which people start to have that conduct pushed back upon. But I think it also depends on the profession that you work in as well, because, as we talked about before, lawyers and legal officers and police have different ethical frameworks that they must work within, and they are going to have professional consequences perhaps much sooner than people who work in other professions, just by virtue of the fact that we are held to a higher standard because of the nature of the work that we do and the trust that is instilled in us to be able to do our jobs properly. For police in particular, the line is drawn earlier. And I completely agree with your comments about, not wanting to pile on this officer. Obviously, I think there is a certain part of his commentary which is a bit typically Australian. It's a bit, but I mean, that doesn't make it right. And that's not to hang, too much on this particular officer. At the end of the day, police are human, just like we all are. We make mistakes, and I'm sure he probably really regrets making those comments. But yeah, if you are in these professions, you should expect to be held to that higher standard and for there to be some accountability if you don't meet that standard.
So the government effectively has to rely on these professional bodies to help with some of this, self-regulation almost, right? Like if we drew a parallel to the, property industry, as a property agent, realtor, I would imagine, again, it's a totally different set of rules, but I would imagine there's plenty of times where when you're renting a property, there's, ethnic judgments or discriminatory notions that could pop up that realtors have to be conscious of, and they have to, there's a professional body that will help regulate behavior such that no one falls out of favor. Is that generally correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if we're still dealing with the police, there are absolutely systems that you can go through, chains of command that you can make complaints about certain conduct by particular officers. That starts with usually writing to a police station where a particular officer works, to the officer in charge, about your experiences and why they weren't okay. And some of them can be escalated all the way up to the Commissioner for Police or to the Crime and Misconduct Commission. So it really depends on the nature and seriousness of what is of the behaviour that's going on. But I think, I guess, tying back to the role within the whole system that police play and the impact that it can have on the whole system, perhaps it's helpful, to break down, the criminal justice system in Queensland is essentially made up of four main players. So you've got the police, so they're the ones who are frontline, investigating crimes, gathering evidence and charging people. They then hand their evidence to prosecutors, who are the people in court representing the state and the interests of the community or complainants or victims, deciding which cases go ahead and presenting them fairly in court. Then you've got defence lawyers like me, so we're representing individuals accused of crimes we're protecting their rights and making sure that the prosecution proves its case properly, and our clients have a fair crack through that justice system. And then you've got the courts, the judges, magistrates, juries. They are acting independently, adjudicating and deciding outcomes. So it's a whole system of checks and balances, and each of those key players depend on the other players doing their job properly and with integrity. So police powers are not unfettered. There are limits on their powers, and their behaviour and evidence is tested in court by defence lawyers, sometimes through cross-examination, or they can be held accountable through courts ruling that evidence is inadmissible because it was unlawfully obtained. So that is an example of how the system checks and balances itself. Prosecutions have to be fair and transparent. Defence lawyers are bound by ethics, and the courts adjudicate all of that to make sure justice is done. So if you start to see the justice system as a machine where all of these players is a cog in the machine, you can see why when any one cog stops working or can't be relied upon to operate the way it should with some integrity, it can have these ripple effects that kind of ripple across the whole system. The public can lose trust in the system, or in making complaints to the police, or in lawyers' honesty, or in the impartiality of courts, and then the whole system starts to wobble. So I think when you look at it that way, it's much easier to see how these, at the start, these small things can just seem like small things, but they do really have these quite far-reaching consequences. And unfortunately for officers like this, these kind of public comments that are forever on the internet can be brought up in cross-examination and used to discredit them as someone who has particular biases and might have, their evidence may not be as reliable to courts or juries because of it. So it does have pretty serious consequences, or it can have.
Well, the checks and balances point is, and again, thank you for walking us through, the components to the system, because again, that checks and balances point is, it's something that I think, for American listeners right now, I think there's a level of envy, I think, that a number of American listeners would have in your description of that, because when you talk about checks and balances, I mean, it seems like the job of everyone in the system is to make sure that no one, element, comes to sort of dominate the other, that the institution as a whole has to, it's got to be somehow symbiotic, and one person goes a little bit too far, well, then the other person checks them. And I think this exercise, the very fact that we can talk about this, I think, again, for me, looking at some events in the States, it's very therapeutic for me, and maybe to some listeners, because lawyers sometimes take a bad rap, but I think you are doing such a great function in what you're doing by making those comments, because there are many places in the world where it's very hard to check the power of police. It's very hard. And, I think I just wanted to make that point, that the Aussie system, it's not perfect, but the very fact that we can talk about this and not face professional consequences, not face some type of, intimidation, is already, a huge win.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's a real privilege, and it's not something that I take for granted. I mean, being able to speak freely about these issues, living in a country where you can do that without threat of, some kind of retaliation, whether that's professionally or in some other sense. It is a real privilege. And honestly, I probably wouldn't have a job doing what I do if I didn't live in a country where I didn't have that freedom, or I didn't at least have the freedom to critically analyze things as I grew up, to start to understand and really look at both sides of arguments, and to have a attitude of being open and learning throughout my life. I think society generally could do with more of that, with more people not just assuming that they know everything and that there's a bit to learn from each person that they meet. And you're right. I mean, criminal defence lawyers in particular do get a bit of a bad rap, and I can't count how many dinner parties I've been to where you get, the "how do you sleep at night" questions.
Oh, really?
When people, yeah. And look, it happens quite frequently, and I don't take offence to it, because I think a lot of it is just probably not having knowledge really about how the system works, and I'm happy to explain that to people. I don't have to get defensive about it. I mean, I sleep very well because I know that my role is vital to the fairness of the system that I work in. It's not just to get people off on technicalities. It's to make sure that the state proves its case properly and that people's rights are protected, and that innocent people aren't wrongly convicted. I'll never forget when I was in my early studies at law school, and I figured out that probably the only area of law that was going to interest me was crime. I went to my lecturer at the time and I said, I think I want to work in crime. Where should I start if I want to look for jobs? And he was explaining, a lot of the main players, like legal aid, where I ended up working for a number of years, or prosecutions and DPP. And he said, what you need to ask yourself is, do you want to be in defence or do you want to prosecute? And I was like, well, I would have no idea where to start with that. Like, how do I know whether I want to do, I'm not sure. And he said, well, someone once told me, he's like, if you can imagine what's worse to you, an innocent person sitting in custody or a guilty man walking free, which one of those is more alarming to you? And I was like, well, that's obvious. Obviously, it's the innocent person sitting in custody. That's more concerning. And he said, you'd be surprised how that's not obvious to a lot of people. And maybe that means you're supposed to be a defence lawyer. And I was like, okay. And he wasn't wrong. I've been doing this for over a decade now, and no signs of switching over to the other side anytime soon. But I just think it's interesting how, your own personal values, I guess, can impact your views on things more than you know. And I guess that's a common theme with what we've been talking about. Your own values, your own prejudices, for example, can bleed through into your work, into the comments that you make. And it's interesting having those conversations with people to try to explain to them what it is we actually do. And interestingly, those people never complain when it's them or their sons that are in trouble with the police.
So crime picked you. You didn't pick crime.
I think so. I like to think so.
Well, I mean, I guess it's something that the skills cross over, but it's a very different beast, right? It's like rugby league and rugby union, maybe. It's the same basic skill set, but as you say, the instincts are different.
Yeah. It was an interesting exercise for me, for sure. And I, before that conversation, wouldn't necessarily have thought that I went any particular way. But I guess he was a great lecturer who helped me to kind of understand how those things and how your own personal convictions can really assist to guide you in the right paths with this sort of thing.
So just following up on that, if we take Alan Dershowitz, a very famous criminal defense lawyer who worked on the OJ case and I think he represented Klaus von Bülow and some other really high-profile people. He talks about his thing about the duty of criminal defense lawyers is to go right up to the line and to defend zealously your client right up to that line. Now, obviously, he's a little bit circumspect about exactly what that line is, but how should we think of the line? Where is roughly speaking, what is he referring to?
Look, I think it's probably a reference to the point at which you can represent your client's best interests. That's our job at the end of the day, up to the point where it is unethical, perhaps. At least that's how I see it. So, as I explained before, when we take oaths, when we become lawyers, we make promises to do our job with integrity. And one of our main duties is candor. We have to be able to be relied upon to be honest and forthright, and we're not allowed to do things to mislead the court. Our job has to be limited by those ethical rules. Otherwise, we couldn't be trusted. Does that make sense? So, I mean, if we could just go into court and tell whatever story, even if we knew it was complete and utter nonsense and not true, the court could not rely on the things that we say, and the whole system wouldn't really work properly. At the end of the day, like I said, the justice system only works if each part, like each role plays its part, and every side is tested and can be relied upon with integrity. And at the end of the day, us defence lawyers, we don't decide guilt or innocence. That's for the court and juries to decide. What we do is we set aside our own personal views about things. We protect the best interests of our client, and we ensure that their journey through the system is fair, and that evidence in their matter is properly scrutinised, and that they aren't punished without the law being properly followed. And that, to me, is a noble pursuit. It's rewarding work. And I'm honoured that people entrust me with their matters and trust me to tell their stories, to help courts understand who they are, not just what it's alleged that they've done. But yeah, I think coming back to that point, I think that line is different per the individual. It's probably not right to say that there aren't some dodgy defence lawyers out there. And there's a reason why people hold these views. But at the end of the day, we do have these ethical frameworks that we must operate within. And I think probably the community just doesn't have enough education about where those ambits are, or perhaps they just haven't met the good defence lawyers who are operating honestly and, working within that framework, but still doing an excellent job for their clients. In my view, I've always been, that integrity is really important. I think the moment you start to compromise on your integrity, it's all downhill from there. Particularly in crime, in where I work in Brisbane, it's a very small legal community, and your reputation is really everything. If you start to become known as someone who takes liberties, is dishonest, judicial officers, like that spreads fairly quickly. You'll lose work. Judicial officers won't trust what you're saying. And yeah, it would impact you quite severely. But quite aside from that, I'm just someone who sleeps better at night when I do it properly. And I think that's the way everyone should operate.
So what are the skills? So if someone is, in high school, they're watching this, they're potentially considering some career options. They are good with expressing themselves. They can write. They have some critical reasoning skills. What are some things that a prospective new entrant into the legal field in Australia or in Queensland should be thinking about? What are let's just ask the question, what are the key skill sets that enable you to do your job as well as you do it?
That's a great question. I've never really thought about that before. I guess from a personal perspective, if you're someone who doesn't enjoy speaking in public, I'd probably lean away from advocacy roles in the justice system. Ultimately, we're in court all the time, and as I said, that's one of my favourite parts of what we do. I like being able to help clients to understand complex legal concepts, break it down in simple language. especially in crime, it can be the difference between someone feeling completely overwhelmed in a justice system that is, the state versus the man. You can be that in between that can help break down what appears very, very complex and confusing to someone at a very stressful time. If you can help make it consumable to them, more able for them to understand and make that situation less stressful, if that's a skill that you have, then that's really essential, I think, to the work that we do with our clients. Communication is key. If you're a good communicator, whether it's in writing, on your feet in court, that is something that is really, really important in what we do. Of course, if you're happy to speak in front of people, the advocacy, like your advocacy box is probably already pretty well ticked, although that can always be honed over time. And I think, I've been doing this for a long time, and I think we're still perfecting it every day. But honestly, I think the main thing is just if injustice really bothers you, I would say this might be where you belong. And I think that's probably how I ended up here. I've always been someone who has a bit of a justice complex. If something feels unfair, I'll feel that quite strongly. And I have noticed that there's a difference between individuals. Some people are more impacted by that sort of thing than others. And I think if that's what gets your fires burning, perhaps that's where you're supposed to be, somewhere in that justice system, whether you're on the defence side or prosecution or maybe in some other role, because there are so many different roles, important roles within the justice system, not just on those two sides. But I think, if you're interested in fairness, then I would say we need you in the justice system.
So tell us a little bit about Armstrong Legal, and again, as a national firm, do you have specialties or how, I guess reputation-wise, certain firms develop core competencies that they become known for. Tell us a little bit about the firm and the good work that you guys do.
Yeah, so Armstrong Legal is a national firm. So we practice in a number of different states, and we work in both criminal work, and we also do contested wills and estates. So I practice in criminal law, but we also have other teams that help people with their estate work. The main, I guess, point of difference with our firm is that whilst we're a national firm, we specialise, I guess, in local expertise. When you contact a big national firm, you don't want to get someone on the end of the line that's a million miles away who's not going to be familiar with the local court practices, the local bar, the local council. You want someone that, and when I say bar, I mean barristers, not the bar. But, you are going to want someone who has local knowledge and expertise. That's something that I think is the point of difference for our firm. And it's something that I'm really proud to be a part of, and I'm really enjoying working within.
Yeah, for sure. Because, it's not like tax planning, where, there's something people proactively would do this. Maybe there's certain strategies that they're looking to deploy in their portfolio. But crime it's a different beast, right? It's not, unless I'm sure there are people who approach crime with a systematic point of view, but in many of the cases, there's something happens. It's certainly not, it arrives and people need a defense, and it's all sudden and new, and what do you do? So those first phone calls, whether they're referrals or over the transom, I can only imagine that, there's a lot of complexity to how you onboard clients.
Yeah, you're right. And I think too, Armstrong is, particularly in criminal law, we have across our national firm quite a high number of accredited specialists in criminal law. I'm not an accredited specialist. I've been practicing in this area for a long time. That's not a particular path that I've taken yet. I'm sure it's on the horizon. But at the end of the day, you're right. You want to be working with a specialist if your liberty is at stake. It's not to say that general practice solicitors, like, I have nothing against general practice solicitors, but I think if it were me, and, you know, even if my liberty weren't at stake, but my professional reputation was, and that can be on the line a lot of the time, depending on what people are charged with or the kinds of legal issues that they're confronting, you really want to be working with people who know this area like the back of their hand and who can help make your journey through the system as comfortable as possible. It's not going to be, you know, a first-class luxury ticket in the justice system. It just isn't. It's really stressful to go through for the ordinary citizen. It's a bit of a minefield, and it's so important that people get good legal advice at the earliest possible point, because people really don't understand how much damage they can do to their interests by you know, off the record chats with police officers, for example, or you know, or even with people who aren't police officers, people who aren't bound by legal professional privilege, who could later be called as witnesses to testify against them about conversations that they've had with people. Like, I just think that you, as an ordinary civilian, you don't really know what you don't know. So it's really important to get that expert legal advice as early as possible so you can protect your interests and your position moving forward. And that's something that we do really well, and that's something that I'm really proud of.
Well, yeah, that's a topic for another whole podcast, is this idea of what you don't know, not knowing what you don't know. And I would imagine in the, you know, anything that touches on the criminal space, there's a lot that you don't even know that you don't know. It's you might walk in there thinking, oh, I don't know this, or there's this subject I might need to brush up on, or, oh, really, what about this? But then there's a whole universe of stuff that you're not even aware that your whole case could impinge on that.
Yeah, and look, the other thing I'm seeing too is this rise in people who perhaps you know, are representing themselves, and they're using things like AI.
Oh my gosh! Tell us about that. Oh my gosh!
Please no, please don't do that, because
ChatGPT defense. Okay, I just carjacked someone. Now what do I do? How do I get out of it?
First of all, the criminal defense lawyer says, don't put those prompts into your ChatGPT, for goodness sake. It's not a good idea to trust AI with legal advice. I think that there's a lot that AI can do to enhance our profession. I really do. And I think more of us need to get onto that. It has to be done in an ethical way, and in a way that we can protect confidentiality of our matters. So that's, I think, one of the main things. But I'm seeing this increase in people probably just, punching in a few things into ChatGPT and then coming to court and like rambling about really irrelevant stuff, quoting cases that don't exist, because that's another thing that it does. It will give you like a case name, and people, even lawyers have done this, have relied on written outlines in court where ChatGPT has like hallucinated and just created a fake case. And then judicial officers are like, have we really come to this point? Like, I don't understand how people do this. Like I said, it's a useful tool for some things, but it absolutely does not replace good legal advice and representation. And it has to be scrutinised. Any work that is produced from AI needs to be carefully scrutinised by a lawyer to make sure that it is all accurate and in line with current legislation, because legislation is always changing as well. That's another thing. And as intelligent as these systems are, it's no replacement. Please stop doing that, everyone. Just get some legal advice.
Well, I think if I'm ever wrongfully accused of anything in Queensland, I will be calling you, Bree, first thing, because you're touching on all of these tenets, these ideas. And I think that the client, there's a almost sacred relationship, in whatever legal dilemma you have. But as you mentioned, that fiduciary relationship that you have with your clients. I mean, every, TV, popular culture, they talk about, well, no, it would breach, client attorney privilege. But it's a sacred thing, and you've got to be able to communicate the. But let me ask you something. In wrapping up, is there such a thing as a good client?
I think all my clients are good in their own way, and I know that sounds like a cliche response, but I've always approached it as, you're dealing with humans. We're all human at the end of the day. There are clients that, are more pleasant to work with than others, but that's kind of beside the point. Our job at the end of the day is still the same, to set aside those views and do our job to represent that person's best interests and to protect them from the things that can go wrong if those powers aren't kept in check. So I don't know. I like to start out by seeing every client in the same way. This is a human being going through a stressful time, and I have the skills to help them break this down. And sure, sometimes we get clients who we probably wouldn't like to hang out with on our days off. But in my mind, that's beside the point. We do our job. We set aside that stuff and we do our job properly. But you know what? It doesn't hurt to just maintain that civility. I don't know. I think that most clients are great. I've had very few clients who aren't grateful for the services that they receive and are really civil and are really lovely to deal with. I understand that everyone that we help is going through a really stressful time. And so you will ultimately deal with some people who take a bit of that out on you from time to time. But you can't get through a career in criminal law without becoming pretty thick-skinned. And yeah, I think at the end of the day, you have to be able to parry that and understand what it's really about. This is a human having a hard time, and to try and bring it back to how you can actually help them. At least that's the way I deal with it.
Great. Well, I think with that, you can have the last word, and I think you've made a great case for any prospective client in need of legal services relevant to your area of expertise at Armstrong Legal. So
yeah, thank you, Jason. And look, I say this to everyone, every client that I have, obviously I hope that you never need me. But if you do, you know where to find me. Find me on LinkedIn or through the Armstrong Legal website.
For sure, definitely. Well, we will, if you're ever in Cairns, come visit the vanilla plantation.
I would love to.
We'll send you a sample of our craft extract. So it was really fun to chat. All right, thanks, Bree. Have a great one. All right.
Thanks, Jason. See ya. Bye.